really thinking through, what is holding me back in this moment, or being really transparent with yourself of what emotion do I feel coming up for me, even if it feels so intense, right? It might be easier to label that as sadness. That might feel easier than shame. But by not fully honoring that emotion for what it is, it can continue to take control over our lives, over our nervous system.
Welcome to the Bountifull Podcast. I'm Shan, and this is a space for curious, thoughtful conversations about what it really means to live a bountiful life. In a world that often rewards more, faster, and louder, Bountifull exists to slow things down, to explore joy, resilience, creativity, and the small choices that shape how we live every day. Each episode is a conversation with someone who's thought deeply about life, work, health, money, relationships, or purpose, and what they've learned along the way. If you're looking for ideas you can actually live with, you're in the right place. In this episode, I'm joined by Dr. Magenta Silberman, a clinical psychologist at the Huntsman Mental Health Institute. Shame is something most of us have felt at some point, even if we don't always recognize it for what it is. So today we're unpacking what shame actually looks like in real life and why it can be so powerful. We talk about how it differs from guilt, how it shapes our sense of self and our relationships, and what it means for our mental health and nervous system. We also explore why shame is something we need to understand, both the helpful and harmful roles it plays if we want to live a more bountiful life.
Magenta, welcome to the Bountifull Podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's so nice to be here.
It is. Welcome to Utah again.
I mean, I just absolutely love Huntsman Health Institute or Mental Health Institute. It's such a great place, and I think you guys help so many people.
Thanks.
So can you tell me a little bit about your upbringing and background?
Yeah. So I had a family that kind of got bored and moved around a little bit. So I was born in Arizona, but spent most of my life on the East Coast, went to high school in Maine, and stayed in New York for college, and then came out here for graduate school. And I've just sort of been here ever since.
And sorry, tell me a bit about like what you studied, where you studied, and where that sort of took you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I studied first psychology and neuroscience at Syracuse University in upstate New York. Loved it there. And then, graduate school just kind of was going to go anywhere that wanted to take me. So I ended up in Utah for graduate studies. And once I graduated from Utah, I did my predoctoral internship in Nebraska, came back for postdoc, and now I'm here.
So we are here on the Bountifull Podcast. What does it mean to you to live a bountiful life?
Yeah. One of the things that really appealed to me about this podcast was that I feel like in my life I struggle with that at times, especially as someone who knew really young what they wanted to do and just kind of pursued that all steam ahead. I had this moment when school was wrapping up where I looked around in my life and I'm like, what do I like? What interests me? Like, what is my life outside of being a psychologist? And so that's when I started to be really intentional about living a fulfilling life, one that's sort of rich with connection, community, and things that just sort of fill your cup, fill your soul a little bit. That's what that means to me.
I've definitely had that before when you like meet new people and they're like, cool, so tell me about you. And you're like, I'm this. And they're like, is that all? And then you on the inside, you're like, God, I'm boring.
Mm-hmm. Yep. For a long time, I was like, I'm a grad student. That's all I am. That's all I do.
One identity.
Yep. Yeah. Now we're a little more robust than that, but.
And then what advice would you give to your 25-year-old self?
Ooh. I think the advice that I would give as I think through this, like all the cliches come to mind, right? Like trust yourself. But I think the most impactful thing really would be like have confidence. You're on the path that you need to be on. You can trust your instincts. I think that's something I wish I'd heard a little earlier in life, that like we know what to do and we can trust that. And that sometimes things take time and that doesn't mean you're on the wrong course.
Yeah, instant gratification and time seem this day and age to be at very different ends of the spectrum.
Definitely.
So we are here today to talk about sort of shame and stigma, but I thought before we would get into that, can you tell me a little bit about what led you to Huntsman and about what you do here.
Yeah. So because I did my graduate training here, I was able to do some practicum experiences and just, had a lot of close connections with the University of Utah healthcare side of things. So I was lucky to have some exposure. Then they were uni, now Huntsman Mental Health Institute, which already just opened my eyes to the really amazing work that we do here. And so once I became licensed, I was really motivated to come back and work as a staff. I really love the role I'm in right now. So I'm not in our main hospital that we're in here. I'm on an off-site program that's focused on young adults. I really love that age group because it's such an underappreciated part, right? Like there's a lot of child and adolescent support and a lot of older adult support. But this launching into adulthood is such a unique place in life to help someone. So we do predominantly assessment and then treatment as well. So I meet with folks 4 times a week for therapy in addition to treatment, or in addition to assessment, excuse me.
Yeah, speaking for myself, I think that age range is just so important. And if you catch someone there or you help them there, arguably you've kind of helped them set up for life, right?
Yeah. And it's funny because up until this point, a vast majority of my experience has been with youth, so children, adolescents. But when I thought back to my experience, I loved that 17, 18. And that's, we're 17, 18-ish to 30 roughly, although we end up getting a lot in the younger spectrum. And I just remember those moments, how fulfilling it is to really meet someone when they're trying to establish their own identity and their own path. It's a really beautiful time to work with someone.
So this might be too general, but with the people that you are treating, is there sort of a thematic of the types of things that they're sort of struggling with?
All sorts of things, to be honest with you. I'm seeing increasingly greater concern around cannabis use or substance use. Cannabis is coming up a lot because of its connection to cannabis-induced psychosis. So that's an area we've been seeing more and more, but really we're all unique humans with a lot of needs. So I find that we get the gambit of things, neurodiversity, mood concerns. Some individuals are struggling interpersonally, some are struggling with work. And really, again, across the spectrum, we have people who have struggled to graduate high school, people who graduated from Ivy League, anyone who needs help, we really want to support them.
I think that's one of the gifts of Huntsman Mental Health Institute is that anyone can walk in and get assessed, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's rare. We really wanted to talk sort of about shame and stigma. Obviously, it shows up a lot in your work. It shows up a lot in life. And as a human being, I think it's difficult to walk through life without experiencing shame at some point. So tell me, what is it? Give me a definition.
Yeah. Shame, to me is this experience that we have when we're living a life that's incongruent with our values or the life that we want to be living. And I differentiate it from something like guilt, which is where we look back at our behavior and we feel badly about what we did, right? And we can really use guilt as a motivator for change of I don't want to do that thing that I wasn't happy with. Shame is usually much more internal and I would say more insidious because it tends to spread to our self-worth. Then we feel shameful maybe about who we are rather than what we did.
So we've talked about the difference between shame and guilt, which is awesome. Do you think people struggle with differentiating between those two? I definitely know in my life, I've had a bit of struggle with feeling like I'm the problem or I am the bad egg versus I did something bad or maybe that wasn't the best representation of behavior.
I do. I think even psychologists struggle to differentiate it in their clients and with themselves because they tend to go really hand in hand, right? But I do, and I think part of what's so insidious about shame is it drives us to quietness. We tend to hold on to that because we can't dare speak it, right? Whereas again, guilt, we're a lot more accepting of I feel guilty about what I did. It doesn't hold that same weight, but they're really easily confused for sure.
One's sort of behavior and one is character.
Yeah, exactly.
And who you are as a human being versus an action you took as a human being, kind of that one really cuts to the core, I think.
Yeah, like that deep internal wound.
Yeah. How does shame show up?
Great question. Shame shows up in a lot of ways. So I think shame can show up in our relationships. We might feel shameful about how we show up in that relationship. I think a lot about, that parent-child. It's such an early, formidable relationship we have. And we can feel a lot of shame in that, both as parent and child. I think it shows up, when we're alone, even. I think it reflects in how we feel about ourselves, how we think about ourselves. It can even show up in work. If we don't feel like we're good enough or adequate enough, then we can struggle, to really meet those expectations. I think it shows up pretty much everywhere, which is hard.
Why do we feel shame at all? Like, what is the purpose of it? Like, maybe psychologically, socially, maybe even physically.
Yeah. I think it's a really adaptive skill, so to speak, in the right dosages. So if we can acknowledge, like, whoa, I really don't like the way I acted in that scenario, or I acted in a way that was so incongruent with who I think I am, that can really guide you in the future. And it can also tell you, like, socially, if we want to look at sociologically, shame is such a helpful way to tell people how to act, right? Like, if we induce shame, that's going to tell you how to behave really quickly. But then we're in a really complex society where there is no one right way. And so again, that's when we can get really internalized and more insidious. So I think it's served to sort of help us guide our behavior in a way that's culturally, socially acceptable or acceptable to us. But in excess, it becomes debilitating. And then we're not living in that way that we want at all.
That to me sort of brings up like evolution in a way. And so did shame first sort of start appearing, obviously, like just in your opinion, because you weren't there, because obviously tribal culture, you have to fit in with the tribe. And if you do something that is not sort of socially accepted or is outside of what is deemed appropriate,
right? Is
that where like you think maybe the origins of shame might have come from?
Yeah, I mean, you got to be shamed if you're messing things up for people, right? In those sort of more prehistoric tribes, that's how you survive. And I think in some ways, even, now taking that evolutionary model, that's still true. Culturally, we have a group of expectations in which we're expected to meet and, social taboos in which we're expected not to cross. And in some ways, your ability to follow that helps you in your culture, in your community.
What if the culture or where you live or like, where you are in the world brushes up against your values and so you're experiencing shame more? So it's more of a like external input to your life versus, yeah, that makes sense, I think.
Yeah. That's exactly where I see shame showing up a lot, right? Particularly I think about, we live in Utah. It's notoriously like a pretty conservative religious area. And I work with a lot of especially youth who are really butting up against, I don't share the same values, or perhaps they're LGBTQ, and that's something that's been really difficult for them in their family environment. And so in those cases, I see that causing a lot of shame in clients in a really harmful way.
That might be sort of someone saying, hey, my identity is that I'm queer or I might be gay, and that's not accepted by my family or my religion. So therefore, where do I belong? And I can't change that about myself.
Right.
Yeah.
And then that's where, we have to wonder, is there, there's a lot of ways to, of course, approach that. But for some people, it's a change in environment, be that talking with their parents and being more accepting, or, creating an environment like their found family, so to speak. Right. So sometimes, like shame, I think we can really address internally, and sometimes we can address that externally by changing our environment.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I guess that's why we're here.
Right.
Why do we need to understand shame in order to live a bountiful life?
Because without understanding it, it can really take over our lives, and then we're not living a very bountiful life. I really think addressing it head on and being able to identify it helps you just live such a more fulfilling and meaningful life.
So we kind of did talk a little bit about this, that shame might have helped us survive in the past, but how could it lead us to like misfiring in modern life, do you think?
Yeah, which I mean, similar to many things, what helped us in the past is not necessarily always the most helpful now in our modern society. But I think that, where it can be harmful is, one, again, it tends to foster in isolation and silence. So it tends to put us inward. So we tend to withdraw or isolate because, the feeling is so intense we can't bear speak it. And so then we're losing all of these things that help connect us to this meaningful life and world. We're losing our social connections. We're losing our hobbies, our passions. So really we need to be able to, I'm a big fan of this classic psychology phrase, we have to name it to tame it. The only way we can tame that emotion is by acknowledging that it's there.
What is an example of shame? So it's like, I just can't imagine sitting down with one of my friends and was like, I feel shamed. I feel shame today. And they're like, okay. So how can we do it in a way? And do people, maybe the question is, do people even realize what they're experiencing?
Yeah. They might not. Yeah. And I think some of that, everyone's a different kind of processor. I'm totally a verbal processor. So me and my friends, we just know hey, I need to go talk through this real quick. Can we, have a deeper, conversation? Others prefer to process more on their own. So they may prefer journaling or just sort of silent thought. Again, no right or wrong way. Some people really can connect with themselves in nature too. So I think, for some, it might be a more individual process of really thinking through, what is holding me back in this moment, or being really transparent with yourself of what emotion do I feel coming up for me, even if it feels so intense, right? It might be easier to label that as sadness. That might feel easier than shame. But by not fully honoring that emotion for what it is, it can continue to take control over our lives, over our nervous system.
You know how sometimes emotions keep kind of ruminating, recycling in someone, and they're like, you go, I feel like I dealt with that, but then it keeps coming up.
Yeah.
Could that be because we're naming the wrong emotion? So you might feel sad about something, but you actually might also feel deep shame about it.
Yeah. I find a lot of individuals will say I just don't get it. I've talked about this so many times, or I've tried to identify this thing, but it doesn't quite feel resolved. That's when I wonder, is there some deeper underlying shame, right? Again, I'm saying that we've excluded the environment. Let's say that that's exactly as it's supposed to be. Is there something deeper there that we just haven't tapped into?
And the environment doesn't have to be your physical space. It could be interpersonal dynamics or those sorts of things, right?
Absolutely, yep.
When we talked on the phone before, obviously, this interview, you described yourself as someone who always did the right thing, the good grades, high achievements, but you felt like a bit of a shell of a person. Can you tell us a bit more about the gap between performance and self-worth for you?
Yeah. I think I fell a little bit into a trap that a lot of individuals do, especially, individuals people who go to grad school are a totally different bunch, right? We have to be really steadfast and sacrifice a lot. And I think I found myself that I found a lot of comfort in academic accolades. To have a professor tell me I did a good job felt really comfortable. And then to see myself progress as a professional, really, again, it was I'm doing the right thing. I'm helping people. I'm on this track, right? But ultimately it didn't, and I still really value that, of course, right? I love the work I do. I wouldn't change it. And in hindsight, I became Magenta the psychologist, and I just really lost a lot of sight of who's Magenta underneath that. Who am I when I go home? Who am I with my friends? And at the time, right, a lot of my community was also psychologists or graduate students, very similar to me in that way. So it was easy for all of us to kind of reinforce this high achieving accolade, perspective. So I had to be, again, very intentional. And it took me quite some time to realize that was even happening. Like, I just thought that's what everyone did, right? I had to kind of decide one day, like, hey, like, look around. Am I happy with all the parts of my life, or just some of them? Or content, at least. I don't always like the pursuit of happiness, but was I at least content? And I realized that the answer to that was no. And I felt really shameful about that. As a psychologist, I'm supposed to have it all together, right? I'm supposed to know all the answers, have no hard feelings or emotions. And when I found myself like not even being able to use basic coping skills, I felt really shameful about that.
I understand. I think obviously I don't live your experience, but yeah, that would have been tough. Like knowing all the things and being like, none of this is helping me right now. Mm-hmm. What did you do? I sort of have two questions. It's like, what did you do, and what was the trigger for having this sort of like, oh, I don't think I'm very happy right now?
Yeah. Well, one, I went to therapy, so
good job.
10 out of 10 would recommend. But the other, I think for me, there were a couple of, I guess, minor catalysts. It wasn't one big thing, but one is that graduate school was coming to an end. And so when I was not in school anymore, right, what was that going to look like? What was my life going to look like? The other for me as well was COVID. I think really made me have to be more introspective because I had more time. It was really easy for me, I think, in graduate school to just fill all my free time with more things and not sit in how I felt. And so I had started therapy before COVID, but that really felt like the time of, like now I'm really confronted with this because I have a lot more time, and the academics are sort of on hold, or the career is on hold.
Why do you think we fill time so much? Mm-hmm. Is it to be avoidant of other stuff going on? Is it just because we like to be busy? Mm-hmm.
I suspect everyone will have a slightly different answer, but I think at my core, I'm definitely avoidant for sure. Sometimes I like to just keep busy and kind of entertain my mind, but at the end of the day, I think we like to avoid uncomfortable feelings. We like to avoid discomfort, which I get it. No one likes to feel uncomfortable.
Was a lot of yours around like shoulds? Like, were you shoulding yourself quite a lot into like, oh, I need to get this done, or I shouldn't procrastinate, or like those sorts of things?
Yeah, I think I should a lot, and I think I held myself to like these very high expectations, and if I didn't meet them, then again, that kind of creeping shame of like, then I wasn't good enough, and that was a really shameful feeling. It's funny, like going to Nebraska ended up being this like fantastic opportunity for me, but I remember beforehand, I thought I was supposed to be in this like very competitive, like, large institution. Like I had a lot of expectations of what that year was supposed to look like, and I didn't. And in hindsight, I'm really grateful because I would have never gotten that training experience. But there was so much shame I felt that I wasn't going to this like big city, big medical institution, right? Because that's what I was supposed to do. But when I could really just slow myself down, it took a lot of reflecting, a lot of talking to my community and my friends, to realize like there's no right path. And when you can start to accept that for yourself, at least for me, I found that shame became a lot less intense because there wasn't a should or there wasn't a have to. There were a lot of ways to get to the same outcome.
Where did all of that pressure to, I'm not an academic as you know, but where did all of that pressure to go to like a big city and a big hospital or a big institution, like where did that come from? Because I can't imagine it coming from parents, or is it from the movies?
I think it was all me. I think it was just all in there. Yeah, my parents never pressured me. They were always really supportive of like where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do. And I didn't feel like my peers were pressuring me either. I think it's just this again, like shame's really insidious when you don't name it, right? And at its core, I felt like if I did anything less than that, I wasn't good enough. Yeah, I don't know, maybe 17-year-old me should have looked at less studies. Maybe that's what all these major medical institutions.
I just love the Nebraska stint in your life. I'm a big believer that the universe will put you where you need to be for the long term. And so what do you think you learned in Nebraska that has set you up for what you're doing now?
Yeah. Well, one thing I'll say is I had such a good supervision experience there. And, you know, I still try to reach out to them every once in a while, which is a good reminder that I should message them. But they really were so passionate and caring about their work. And that was a breath of fresh air in, you know, I think people can tend to get very, you know, just jaded over time. And so that was really refreshing for me just to see people who, you know, despite having been in the field for decades, still felt really passionately. And then just working with individuals that I typically wouldn't have, right, in a rural setting. We were one of the only psychologists for hundreds of miles. So it was a really, you know, we took anyone and everyone, even if we had assessed like, you know, their grandmother and their parent and then the person in front of us. And there was so much value in that to me to see for individuals who don't have a lot of resources. As a psychologist, you have to really make that work and find a way to meet your client where they're at and teach yourself a lot. And, you know, I just had so much empathy and respect for the really difficult things that people were going through.
Yeah, like super rural, a lot of lower income, a lot of stigma. So maybe we should talk about the stigma element of this.
Yeah. I mean, when you talk about rural, right, we're saying like farmers, migrant workers, like not people you typically associate going to see a psychologist. And for a lot of individuals, it was usually their children, I found, that would be taking them to our practice. And for whatever reason or another, they're struggling in school, they're noticing behavior change. And again, the dedication people have to their families and their children is really remarkable. And you have this beautiful window to say like, hey, I wonder if it'd be helpful if we could support you too. It must be really hard to see your child struggling. And again, you'd be surprised how open people are when you give them an opportunity for that. Of course, not everyone, but I really admired like the reputation that we had in the community. Again, it wasn't like, oh, those are those kooky psychologists. Like there was a lot of mutual respect. And again, it's not perfect. There's a lot of need. I mean, they had wait lists so long, as I'm sure you could imagine.
We have long wait lists in New Zealand.
Yeah.
Is there a question around like how shame lives in the body, not just the mind?
I think so. I think for people, shame's very visceral, which is part of what makes it challenging to name, I think. Some individuals, I think, can be, and I'll say myself included, can be very overwhelmed by that feeling. And that's what I think is where we can tend to avoid. So we try to disconnect our mind and body on purpose. So then we have to be really intentional about checking in with our body. I think particularly when it relates to trauma, there's a lot that lives in the body. And that's something where I think shame and trauma, that intersection, can be very physical.
Shall we talk a little bit about that, about maybe how shame and trauma are interconnected and sort of what's going on there?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a lot of different theories about trauma. I think, you know, we always have to be careful in this space because I do think increasingly it's becoming a space where pseudoscience is tending to thrive. So I just want to be mindful about that. And a lot of it is related to like the physical body. So I just want to be really mindful of that. But at the same time, you know, there's a lot of, ultimately trauma is the disproportionate responding of your nervous system. It's telling you that there's a threat when perhaps there isn't, because you've experienced a very real threat to your life, to your body, to your livelihood. And in that way, it lives in the body because our brain isn't telling us like, that reminds me of this trauma, I should react, right? Like that's not a conscious process. That's something that just happens automatically. And then we have to take that information and say, whoa, I need to pump the brakes. I'm safe. This isn't happening to me, right? But that happens after the body response, not before. So in that way, people experience a lot of shame about this sort of involuntary reaction our body can have. Even individuals in the moment, I've worked with a lot of patients who will say, like, I wish that I had ran. I wish that I had fought. Like, why didn't my body respond in that way? Why did I freeze instead? And having to work through like so much shame we're holding for ultimately something that's involuntary. Like our body, we didn't choose that, our body decided for us.
Is there a way we can evolve, or is that just how we are?
So most individuals, as greater time passes, they're less likely to have those like very automatic fight or flight responses. And they'll usually be more subtle, like I'm getting this uncomfortable feeling that I don't recognize. But particularly in the early or in complex or chronic PTSD, you can see more of those fight or flight responses. And one thing I always say is like, we don't want to get rid of that, right? Like that's a really helpful, if our body got rid of that, we'd be in a lot of trouble. But can we acknowledge and thank you body for doing what you need to do. And like, I'm safe right now. I don't need this response. And the more that we do that, the more we practice acknowledging like, I'm safe. It's okay. I don't need to run. I don't need to fight. I'm remembering something that made me feel that way, but I'm not in the moment right now. The more control we can get over that response. But shame is one of those things that can really hold us back from that, because if we feel a lot of shame about that response, we're less likely to want to address it, right? We're just going to feel badly about ourselves. We're going to internalize that as sort of a core wound, and we're going to be less likely to address it, and we're just going to feel really shameful about it.
Is there people that respond in different ways? Like, how do you know can you be someone that freezes or fights or flights? Like, can you be one of those dominant, or does it depend on the situation?
Typically depends, but I do find most people I work with, and I'll say myself included, we notice we tend to go one way or the other, but there's no like predisposition necessarily. It's just whatever feels right to your body in the moment.
Is shame how it affects the nervous system similar to how anxiety shows up like in your physical symptoms?
It could. It's not as consistent, right? So it'll be different for different people. And it depends on the intensity and how long, over time you've been holding that feeling. I find for most people it tends to present more, again, we're kind of intentionally trying to disconnect our body and mind. So I find a lot of individuals tend to experience shame more passively, like this disconnect dissociation, until they're confronted with it. And that's when it feels much more visceral, like you feel it in your chest, you feel your heart rate increasing. But usually it's more this kind of thing in the background that I'd say you're trying to create distance from. So it tends to feel more dissociative to people.
I think on our call we talked a little bit about like cycles, because we all have cycles, and that to me, when say if you have like a shame event, let's call it an event or a moment, and then you're on the tracks. Say your cycle's a train, you're now on the tracks. The train has left the station, and you have a choice. You can either like let it run, and then you're going to probably practice like dissociated behaviour, those sorts of things. That for me is actually becoming like myopically focused and avoiding everything else. And so I had to learn in my life how to get off the track. Like what was my on-ramp, like treating it sort of like a motorway or a freeway where you're like, okay, I need to get off the track. What do you think people should learn about their own like cycles and rhythms and on-ramps, off-ramps, those sorts of things?
And I love that analogy because one thing I also tell people is if we've kind of gotten on a track, we don't have to stay. So we could take the exit at any time, right? So I really love that metaphor and analogy. I think that I love the idea of identifying patterns. What are the things that tend to make me feel this way? And when I do, what does that look like in my behavior? this is where that very classic kind of CBT style, like what are the changes in how I'm thinking, I'm feeling, I'm behaving, are really helpful, because that's all stuff you can do yourself, right? Like individually, or really lean on your community as well. Like, hey, have you noticed any change in how I'm showing up in our relationship? Or, hey, I'm noticing I'm hanging out less. Do you notice that? But being able to identify that, and then knowing that at any point, like just because we're on that cycle doesn't mean we're stuck. We can get off, we can make a change. We don't have to see it through.
Also maybe like behaviors and actions are part of that, right? So definitely like map the feelings, but then behaviors and actions, like what do you do when you're, that I think really helped me. It was like, what actions am I taking? What am I doing? What am I not doing?
Yes.
What am I not seeing? And then am I going to go full cycle? Yeah, interesting.
And I'm a big fan of opposite action. It's part of like the DBT world. So I know for me, my number one avoidance strategy is I will scroll on TikTok, and I will do that as long as I need to. So what I've started to do more recently, in like the last year or so, is if I find myself wanting to just kind of scroll or not engage, I'm doing the exact opposite. So I'm turning my phone off and I'm putting it somewhere else. And it's so hard. Like I say that like it's really easy. It's not. But the more practice you get with it, the better you get at doing that. But I'm a really big fan of just that opposite action. And I just remind myself, I'm doing the opposite because this is more helpful than going on that path.
Sorry, what is DBT?
Oh, sorry. DBT is dialectical behavioral therapy. It's like a third wave therapy.
Okay.
And it's really common. So at the Huntsman Mental Health Institute, we rely a lot on DBT, especially for crisis intervention. But it was developed to treat borderline personality disorder. So it really focuses on like mindfulness, coping skills, distress tolerance, and then your interpersonal effectiveness as well. So I like to steal little skills from that to use in day-to-day life.
So we have talked about this a little bit. Is all shame bad? I think I'd love to look at like how it's actually helpful and then how it's harmful. I feel like a lot of us, and when I walked away from our chat, I went into my kitchen and I was like, oh, it had never occurred to me that shame actually could be good for you, which sounds like a very weird thing to say, but it has to be there for a reason. And so why is shame good, and then why is shame bad?
Yeah, I think shame is good or helpful in that it tells you what you value. One of the things I tell my clients when we're trying to figure out like what do we care about is I ask, what makes you angry? That's the first question I ask them, because these big, powerful, visceral emotions tell us what's important to us. And so if we're feeling shame, that means there's something really important to us that we're not doing. And we have the chance to maybe change things and start to do that. It becomes bad and more harmful when it's debilitating, when it's actually not moving you to your value, but taking you away from it. And you start to get this, core sense of self that I am bad, I am not good, I am worthless, right? When it starts to morph into this like very personal, self-deprecating, that's when I start to get really worried.
Is there, I'm a big fan of like exercises on the show. Is there an exercise that someone could do to map their like shame, goods and bads, or harmful, helpful? I guess what you were saying around what makes me angry, that's really great, but then could they write like what the value associated with with whatever that topic is for them?
Yeah, absolutely. So one exercise I think is, just even listing. So like when I'm in session, for example, if I ask like, what's something that makes you angry? And someone were to say, when I'm talking and it seems like someone's not listening. So you really value being heard. That's really important to you. So being able to like find the thing and think about, what does that mean for me? Like, what is that underneath it? Obviously I think that's really helpful in a session, because sometimes we'll be like, I just like to be listened to. What are you talking about?
So then for me, what that brings up is like, say you're not being heard. The internalized shame of that, if it happens to you, could be, I don't matter, which is like very painful.
Right.
And so that's the like really good, helpful, really harmful.
Exactly. Beautiful example. Agreed.
Yeah.
because then it, jumps to that core value or core perception of self, right? So I'm a big fan of like, name the thing. Like if I think about exercises, I'm gonna name it, I'm gonna identify it. I also really am a big fan of personifying like these hard emotions. So I like to ask questions like, why? All right, shame, you're here, what's up? What are we on about today? What's happening? Why am I feeling this way? What situation? I'll think about what's been happening in my life recently that I might be feeling this way. And then I'll do that opposite action of like, okay, so if I'm wanting to just kind of isolate or distract or totally disconnect from my brain and body, I'm gonna do the opposite of that. I'm gonna go connect with my body. I'm gonna go for a walk or a hike or just get outside. So those are some of the little exercises that I think people could take from this and do day to day.
Do you think, sort of as best as people can with like their known knowns, say they do this little exercise, they go, okay, here's things that make me angry, or I've figured out what my values are and like what happens when my values aren't met. Is there any like training, or like it's in another episode we've talked about stress inoculation, like little exposures. Is there stuff? Is it about awareness of these things, or is it about like doing some kind of training to not feel the like negative emotion so much?
Yeah, for some people, awareness is enough. For some people, that can be a powerful enough intervention to alleviate suffering and make change. For other individuals, especially if they've been experiencing this for a longer period of time, they may need a little bit more, either some people will do like group therapies, or they might learn about a therapeutic modality on their own to help themselves. I think the most important thing at that point would really be, do I have the skills to experience this level of discomfort? That would be a question I'd ask myself. And if the answer is no, I don't, like I will be debilitated by this, that's when I would say a therapeutic intervention would be really helpful. But some individuals, they do, and that insight is just enough of an intervention by itself.
Yeah, and then there's like rational brain and emotional brain. And even if you're being rational, if you're like rationally thinking about your emotions, sometimes your emotions can leave the station without you, right?
Yes, 100%.
I think that made sense.
Totally. Made perfect sense.
Can we talk a little bit about the things that happen to you that cause shame versus the things like, I don't want to say values because I think it's different, but I feel like there is a place for like, sometimes shame can be put on you by others or events that happen. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I differentiate that as we've been kind of going through this conversation and the back of my brain's been working. If I think about a more internalized shame as an incongruence between, how I'm acting and my values, shame sort of externally imposed on me is that I have a differing value from those around me, to put it more simply. And, I think the impact ultimately can be the same. The only thing that I think can be really challenging is when you're in an environment that's consistently invalidating to your experience and your values. Over time, that can cause a lot of psychological distress. And in some cases can even lead to more like pathology, because we're so used to not getting our needs met or being undervalued that now we're starting to engage in behaviors that to get those needs met in other ways that may not be genuine or true to ourselves. And that's really hard because there's no easy solution. It's sometimes changing your environment isn't possible. And that's really hard.
How does shame intersect with identity, like gender, sexuality, race, faith, class?
I think that, again, if I'm looking at shame as something that over time is really getting at the core, like it's starting to define how we view ourselves, think about ourselves, the faith we have in our ability to do things, it's going to fundamentally impact all of those things, right? And I think, but more importantly, we're at risk to experience shame of our identity because of our environment. So if you're an individual who's a person of color in a predominantly white space, you're going to over time, perhaps unconsciously experience this messaging that the way I look, the way I present, my culture, my identity is wrong. And that's when we can experience more of that like internalized you know, internalized homophobia, internalized misogyny, like this. Even though we are of that identity, we are not immune to the impact that the bias has around us.
If you did have a patient that was in an environment where they were experiencing a lot of shame because of their identity or whatnot, what tools or strategies would you give them to try cope if they just could not get out of their environment?
The biggest thing in that for me would be community support and being able to identify what, if anything, is in our control. So is there something specifically in the workplace? Can we help support there? Can I help connect them with any services that would be helpful to mitigate this, this feeling that they're having, this experience that they're having? The biggest thing really too is just understanding their experience, understanding how that's showing up in their day-to-day life. Those would be all the things before I ever even tapped into like internal coping. I'd be like, let's see what we can change and let me better understand the system that you're in. And then can we lean into family support? Can we find shared community, right? Like I want to really emphasize that piece before I go into, okay, internally, how do we cope? Because that feeling that they're having is a very natural reaction to a harmful environment. And so I always want to be mindful that I'm not sort of reinforcing like this is a you problem, because it's not a you problem, right? It's a systemic problem.
Can we talk a little bit about how stigma fuels shame, especially around, mental health, illness, or even difference?
Yeah. So I think stigma at its core is a really big reason why, if we're in the mental health sphere, that really continues to fuel shame. Because again, shame thrives when we're in isolation. So if you have, say, depression, and there's this significant stigma about that, like, what do you mean you can't get out of bed? What do you mean you feel bad? You have a great life, right? Like all this stigma that we get, we're gonna just naturally hold that in more and more and more, and we're gonna feel greater shame. And we're gonna be less likely to then seek out support or treatment, even if it gets really bad, right? So I think certainly they're related, especially in the mental health sphere. And it's why I really admire, I think in the day and age of, social media, there is so much more conversation around mental health that I think stigma certainly is changing, but it's still present. But I really do appreciate that we're at least able to have more conversations and some more awareness.
Do you do group therapy with the groups that you look after?
I don't anymore. I have historically, but we do have group therapy in our program. I just don't facilitate them.
Do you think that people understanding at a base level that they're not alone in how they're feeling helps them sort of start to reduce some of the stigma?
Definitely. I think for some conditions more than others, that's a really impactful opportunity. And it's one of the reasons I love group therapy, because a peer is going to be way more impactful than I'm going to be in certain respects, because they can speak to their lived experience. I find too, for a lot of families, it really helps to hear like I'm not alone. When you experience like a child developing schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, it really helps to talk with other families and know like, okay, I'm not alone in this, and it's not my fault, and there's community here.
Mental illness is such a fault-driven kind of environment, right? Like, my brain isn't healthy, therefore it's such an attack on your character if you've got like a chemical imbalance, or there's just something in your brain health that's not quite going right. Such a hard one emotionally.
Yeah, absolutely.
Heartbreaking. Sometimes we live in a culture, and I think this is global, that tells us that we're kind of never enough. How can people sort of work on their self-worth or being enough for themselves?
Yeah. I think being enough is a really hard concept that I experience, of course, myself, and I think a lot of people experience. And there's no one right way, but one thing I will say that I think is really helpful is doing things. You mentioned earlier, like we're kind of in this capitalist society that we have to like live in the context of. And so that can drive a lot of people to, I have to do things perfectly, or to the point that I could monetize it, or I need to do something in the most effective, efficient way. So I always say challenging that by itself can be really helpful. Like, I'm going to do something not efficiently, which that alone for most people is like, what? Like, why would I do that? That's such a waste of my time. And I always kind of push back on like, but what would it feel like to do something in not the perfect way?
My initial response, my immediate was joy.
Really?
Yeah, just to like muddle through some sort of task, not efficiently, but just to be in the process of it.
I love that, because that is not the reaction I normally get. The reaction I normally get is like, why? What's the point? What's the point of that? And then they're kind of annoyed.
I work pretty hard on my joy response, or trying to be in the moment, because I think ultimately we've only got one life.
Yeah.
And most of the experiences we have, we won't get back. Yeah. And so if you're too busy like wasting the moment away and not enjoying it, it'll go. And did you enjoy it? Did you have the most fun with it? Or did it kind of just pass you by? Yeah. And I sort of feel like passing by emotions sometimes is a waste of like an experience.
Totally. And I love that, because we have such a focus on doing it in the most effective way that we really miss out on the full experience. I think about something as simple as going to the grocery store. For me, it's always a better experience when I just like take my time and like kind of putz around through the aisles and take a look, instead of this like, okay, I have to hit produce and then this and then that, right? Like then the whole time I'm just stressed, versus like, I just get to be here and be a human and get my nourishment for the week, and that's cool.
See what products are on the shelf.
Yeah, exactly.
So sort of coming full circle, I would love to talk about sort of healing the shame within, or the healing process, moving through and beyond. We have talked a little bit about the first step, which is like naming your shame or acknowledging it. What are some of the other things that people can do?
I really like the idea of people sort of imagining, like willing the shame away. Imagining, if I didn't hold on to this shame, what would my life look like? What would I do? And start to do those things. So if, I would be a person, say, who wouldn't be afraid in a social situation, I'd go try new things. Try to do the things, right? I also think really connecting with what's important to you and doing that in an intentional way. Again, we kind of do it subconsciously, but rarely do we ever sit down and say, what is important to me? What do I want more of in my life? And how do I make that happen? So to me, those are like, if you can do those things, I don't think shame's got a chance.
Or it does, but maybe your response to it will be less, which is awesome.
Yeah, it won't take over you.
This is why we're here on the Bountifull Podcast, is to learn these sort of tools and techniques and to be able to live fully, which I actually think shame is a blocker to joy.
Yeah. In a lot of ways it is, yes.
What helps people when they feel stuck?
Again, that tendency where in shame we withdraw. I think what really helps is community and connection in whatever that looks like to you, whether that's, attending a group of a shared interest, talking with a partner or a friend, family, even if it's just being physically around people in a coffee shop that you're not speaking to. Having greater connection really helps when we're stuck, even if you're not talking to someone. And I also think to get unstuck, again, you have to acknowledge that you are stuck. And some people just, again, it's really easy to be disconnected from our experience and not even recognize, like, I am in a cycle of something that I don't like.
You have mentioned the concept of gentle self-parenting. Can you tell me about that?
It's something I do a lot for myself, and I definitely will recommend to clients if I think that's a good fit. Sometimes we have to just sort of gentle parent ourselves out of things. I mentioned earlier that if I want to go on TikTok and just doom scroll, I have to do the opposite of that. But that feels horrible. I don't want to do that. So sometimes I'll have to be like, yeah, I know, that's really annoying. It's frustrating that we can't just like be on our phone all day in a way that like maybe a parent would talk to their child. But I find for me, it helps it feel a lot less painful to acknowledge, like, it does suck. It is uncomfortable. Because just doing the thing without acknowledging that, for me at times, it feels more validating. It feels more challenging. I also like the idea of being able to kind of talk through to yourself, like, I'm not a bad person, right? Like, this is a behavior. It's not about me as a person. And that too feels very reminiscent of a gentle parenting. Like, you're not a bad kid, right? Let's talk through what we can do different next time.
I don't know what the question is, but how do you marry like bad behavior with who you are as a person? Like, bad behavior is not necessarily acceptable. I don't think. But how can you kind of have that conversation with yourself so that it ends up in a congruent place?
Yeah. I look at it not so much as a bad behavior versus like, again, what do we want to be doing? Because candidly, like, some people want to lie, or some people want to steal, or whatever that is. And that's not a lot you can always work with. Like, if they don't have shame for doing those things, it's a totally different process. But I think there's a way to kind of, like, let's say you do something somewhat out of character. I think about like an adolescent who smokes for the first time, and like that was never something they wanted to do. Really processing through with them, did that connect to your value in some way? And then you might be able to deeper dive and find like, well, I was trying to cope with anxiety, or I was trying to have a friend connection, right? And then in that way it is congruent, and suddenly the behavior doesn't seem so objectively bad. Now again, if they want to smoke, different story, but.
Yeah, that just like all kind of unraveled in a positive way for me, because like when I was younger, candidly, I went to my mum and I was like, Mum, I want to try a cigarette. And she was like, why are you telling me this? And it was important for me to have like safety and comfort and to be allowed to experiment. But they'd always said, well, if you want to try things, let us know.
Right.
And you can, you know, within reason, try things under our roof. I said, I want to try a cigarette. But then sort of hearing you talk, I was like, that was in alignment with my value of like curiosity, and therefore, you know, but I can see sort of how the behavior would unravel back to the value, maybe the shame sort of, if you were, it really just does come back to understanding what matters to you, understanding what you value, and maybe also challenging your assumptions on your values, because if it turns out that it's not congruent, then maybe it's that value is not something you actually care about.
Yeah.
Which requires a degree of honesty.
Yes. And will change over time. And there is like, as you mentioned with that honesty, I find a lot of people can be stubborn about things, guilty also, but like once we've committed, like, no, I'm a curious person and that will never go away. Well, maybe there will be times you're less curious than others, and that's okay. And similarly, you know, when do we get to, I just don't think we get to judge what is important to someone. There might be a person who values risk-seeking, and who am I to say that that's better or worse than being any other value?
What do we need to understand about like judgment in this whole world of shame?
I think, again, judgment is pretty fueling for shame, both of the judgments that we hold for others, for ourselves, and then the judgment that others may have on us. We also witness a lot of judgment, you know, whether it's explicit or not, by what people choose to talk about and give attention to. So I think inherently judgment and shame go hand in hand, and I look at judgment really as like a fuel to the shame fire, if you will.
So be kinder to yourself.
Yeah. We can all probably judge a little less, but.
Okay, quick fire questions.
Okay.
What, in your opinion, is the most underrated fruit or vegetable?
Ooh, raspberries. Love raspberries.
It's in my bag. I can share them with you.
That's amazing.
They're organic too.
Right answer.
What's your favorite cocktail if you drink?
Ooh, whiskey sour.
What word describes your life?
Authentic.
What are you most proud of?
I am most proud of, going on a solo trip. That's what I'm most proud of.
Where'd you go?
I don't know if I should say it's controversial now, but I went to Israel.
Oh, I've been there too.
Okay.
Do you have any tenets that you live by?
I think authenticity is a big one for me. That's one I value a lot, and playfulness and fun. I haven't put a lot of value in that in my life, so I'm trying to be more intentional to live that way.
You might have just answered the next question. I'll ask it anyways. What is one thing that's really mattered in life that maybe you didn't realize mattered as much at the time?
humor, fun. Yeah, definitely.
And what is something you thought mattered but realized that it actually didn't?
This is gonna sound really silly, but like doing your best. Like I thought you had to do that all the time, 100%, just like be on it. And it actually just really doesn't matter. Sometimes you just gotta show up.
Something that I learned from my cycle was that telling me that I need to be good or doing my best was setting me up for failure rather than just being.
Yeah.
Very different. Showing up, just being who you are. You don't have to be the best version of who you are. That might not even make sense, but you do just being and showing up.
And that's enough.
Yeah.
I have to remind myself of that. But
that's a big one. We're coming from like little shame people over here. That's what I'm recognizing. What's a simple habit that's made your life better?
Drinking more water.
Valid.
Yeah.
What brings you joy?
My people and my cats.
What's something in your toolkit for when you are having a bad day, a bad week, or maybe a tough season?
My go-to is I have to get out of the environment. So I drive somewhere to a park, wherever, and I sit and I have my little drink and I have something that I'm gonna find fun or joyful, and I just sit and touch grass and do that thing.
Like grounding?
Yep. I'm very literal.
Yeah, we are too. We have a gravel pit at our house, and every morning we go outside. Well, my husband does this. I don't. I do other stuff, and he just stands there with his feet on the gravel, and he's like, "I'm earthing."
That's amazing, and sounds kind of painful, but amazing.
Gravel is in like little pebbles, so they're smooth.
All right.
Final question: what's one thing you hope our listeners remember the next time they feel shame or stuff comes up for them?
Yeah. That shame is a very normal emotion. You're not alone. You've survived it before. You'll survive it again. And maybe there's something in your life that you might be wanting more or less of, and maybe be curious about that.
Amazing. Thank you, Magenta, for joining the Bountifull Podcast. It's been a pleasure having you on and obviously learning from your insights and also deep diving into some of your story.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for having me here. This was awesome.